from moving from very comfortable corporate settings, you need more than just the tragedy of George Floyd to make a move like that. And so my why was anchored into my two boys, who were two little black boys. And my responsibility as a father to ensure that the world they entered into, they had access to anything that they wanted, but more importantly, I had to make sure they wouldn't end up in a position that we were all watching that 8.5-minute video. And I knew that the conversations I was having as a C-suite executive, in the decisions I was making, in the leverage I had in those roles, wasn't going to ensure that didn't happen for my boys. Wasn't going to ensure that they had a world to where they had access. And because we came from the backgrounds that John has already talked about, we knew and we were empowered to take on the responsibility of creating that change ourselves in order to fulfill, my personal why. And so it wasn't hard to say, you know what, I'm going to give my 2-week notice. Same for John. I know it wasn't hard for him because we knew the bigger why was more important, and it allowed us to be uncomfortable because we knew if we could accomplish that why, not only would it positively impact my 2 kids, John's 2 nephews, but it would positively impact a whole bunch of people that look like my kids and John's 2 nephews.
Welcome to Pinnacle Code, where we spotlight excellence in the culture. I'm your host, Ben Arthur. Excited to be joined by 2 guests at the same time for the first time ever. Brothers Mike and John Burns. They are successful entrepreneurs, and together they run a Washington, D.C. based marketing and consulting agency in their namesake, kind of with the mission being to uplift and empower the Black community and more generally people of color. And within that kind of umbrella, they have started HQ House, where they have a location in D.C. currently, and it's basically a luxury space for Black people of color to network, build relationships, to work out, really to feel at home. It's a really unique social club, and it's really dope because they're recently in the process of expanding to the African continent, to Kenya in particular, and it's set to become the first African American owned private membership club in Africa. So that is huge, and super excited to have this conversation with them. Grateful that they've taken time out of their busy schedules to join me. Mike and John, thank you so much for your time.
And thanks for having us.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
No problem at all. And let's kind of get right into it. I want to start with kind of your guys' upbringing, kind of the reason why you guys see the world as you do. And I know a lot of my audience probably may not be familiar kind of with your journeys, your stories. And so I guess to start, and either of you guys can go first, but what do people need to know about your upbringing to understand who you guys are today as entrepreneurs and as visionaries?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think there's kind of 2 critical pieces that really kind of created our drive, our enthusiasm, our commitment to civic engagement, and ultimately our belief in impacting the mobilizing community. 2 critical mentors and role models for us growing up. One, our mother. My mother is a notable physician in Texas. She created her own pediatric practice, which grew to be one of the largest in the state of Texas. But she also believed in the power of civic engagement and giving back. So she was a community service champion for those in the most marginalized places across Texas. And so she really believed in not only talking the talk, but walking the walk. And so she's been a testament to my brother and I of what hard work, what commitment, what community empowerment looks like. And then secondly, our grandfather. Our grandfather was a civil rights icon in Texas. He marched with the likes of Dr. King and Thurgood Marshall and Medgar Evers and many others, and really showed us the power of mobilization and bringing people together for a common goal. And that really instilled with us that level of activism and that level of obligation to empower, to mobilize and support and uplift people of color, specifically Black folks. And then on the flip side, my brother and I both went to military school. And so I went to military school from 2nd to 12th grade. Mike went to military high school, later went to West Point and served in the military for a long time. And so that really showed us what service really looks like and being a true agent of change, but ultimately serving a larger team and a larger purpose. And so I think those coming together really allowed us to dream big, but also continue to have that level of commitment to our people, specifically Black folks, to create a better future and a better tomorrow for us all.
Yeah, and only thing I'd add to that, because I think John did a great job of kind of laying out the most important people in our lives and in the environment. But what I would also add to what they did, outside of just the impact, they set an example of being unapologetically in the space that they were in. Right. And our mom told us at a very young age, and she said, boys, if you're at the table, you better have a voice. Right. And so we were programmed very, very early in believing that we were enough and that we didn't need permission from other people to go after what we thought was ours. And so with all the examples I gave from impact, and then you have the layer of being unapologetically confident in who you are, I think all of those things helped lead us to this point in our lives.
So what was that, maybe that moment to where you guys decided to create the Burns Brothers agency? Because I know, John, for you have a background in law, you're a community activist, and then Mike, kind of the whole West Point thing, military veteran, Fortune 500 executive, to my understanding. But then there's a point to where you guys come together and go at this full time. And I know, Mike, and I was watching an ABC News kind of feature that they did on you guys, and you mentioned George Floyd's murder and kind of how that was really pivotal to you, like kind of getting on the phone and calling your brother. So can you kind of break that down a little bit more as to like why you guys finally decided to, as together as brothers, to kind of go about this mission?
You mentioned the word why, and I think that's kind of important to lay the foundation, right? Because in order to make like a big change like this, from moving from very comfortable corporate settings, you need more than just the tragedy of George Floyd to make a move like that. And so my why was anchored into my two boys, who were two little Black boys. And my responsibility as a father to ensure that the world they entered into, they had access to anything that they wanted, but more importantly, I had to make sure they wouldn't end up in a position that we were all watching in that 8.5-minute video. And I knew that the conversations I was having as a C-suite executive, and the decisions I was making, and the leverage I had in those roles, wasn't going to ensure that didn't happen for my boys, wasn't going to ensure that they had a world to where they had access. And because we came from the backgrounds that John has already talked about, we knew and we were empowered to take on the responsibility of creating that change ourselves in order to fulfill, my personal why. And so it wasn't hard to say, you know what, I'm going to give my 2-week notice. Same for John. I know it wasn't hard for him, because we knew the bigger why was more important, and it allowed us to be uncomfortable because we knew if we could accomplish that why, not only would it positively impact my two kids, John's two nephews, but it would positively impact a whole bunch of people that looked like my kids and John's two nephews.
John, I mean, I don't know if you had anything to kind of add to that, but I guess, like for you, like what is your why, right? Is it kind of your nephews? I mean, you guys have talked about kind of like that why, just from the upbringing and kind of having these civic responsibilities just from your upbringing. But was kind of George Floyd like that final tipping point to you as well? Or like what was your vantage point into like to kind of going all in on this with your brother?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mike tells that story so eloquently. I think it was really that moment in time. And I think for so many people, not just us, that was such a monumental time for us to really not only reflect, but really be diligent around whatever type of action we were going to take moving forward. And for us, we felt like we had a unique opportunity to do something bigger than ourselves. And so we kind of stepped into that wholeheartedly with, vigor and with grace and with determination. And I think as we've evolved as an organization, we really learned that our purpose and our calling is bigger than what we initially anticipated. We really, and not to sound cliche or kind of overstate something, we really think we can change the world. And I think we can change circumstances for Black people. I think we can build community. I think we can change lives. And so we come into work every single day with such a big calling, a big purpose, but we come into it with like determination, with teammanship, with a great amount of confidence in our abilities, but also confidence in the people that we surround ourselves with, and the team that we call family. And so we really believe that we have a big calling, and we're holding ourselves accountable to that calling.
I want to kind of dive into that a little more, because I think there's a number of people who want to change the world, but they don't take those actionable steps consistently over a long period of time, as you guys have been doing, right? Like, because it's one thing to say that, but it's one thing to put into practice what these goals that you guys are trying to attain, to really create impact at like the highest of levels. And so what is maybe the challenge of that, like taking on the burden of such a massive mission and putting that into actionable steps to where you guys know that you're always going to be added and that it's not just going to be a fleeting thing?
Yeah, that's an amazing question, and I can only speak as I see the world. John may have a different point of view around it, but the work itself isn't hard, right? I mean, the days can be hard because it's business, but the work of change isn't hard. What is hard is helping people understand where they fit in the larger puzzle of change, and then empowering them and giving them the tools to fulfill their roles as effective as possible. And so John and I can come up with the vision, we can put on the structure, but change is a team-based sport, right? It's a volume-based game. And so everyone has to roll this boulder up the hill at one time. And I think sometimes we think of change, we think, and this is my military coming in, like we sometimes think change, everyone is the same role and has the same responsibility. And even sometimes as Black people, we think everyone needs to be picketing on the front line. Everyone needs to be doing this stuff. And that's not the way it actually works. Everyone has a place. There's some people that need to be picketing. There's some people who don't need to be picketing, who need to be, strategizing and helping our people understand their role in this greater change, and then empowering them to do it. That becomes a thing that becomes a more complex task. But the change itself and kind of implementing and orchestrating the change, at least for me, it is not where kind of the difficulty or the challenge comes. But John may have different points.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, again, everybody plays their own unique role. And I don't think one role is more important than the other. I think it's just very important that everybody plays some certain position, just like in any team sport, right? Everybody plays their role, plays their position. But I think what you mentioned earlier was a key piece around like the consistent piece, right? I think in anything that you do, there has to be maintain a level of consistency. I think if you look at this like political climate, the world that we're currently in, I think other than like the George Floyd incident, 4 years ago, I think we're in another critical time around the Black experience, where you see all these cutbacks around DE&I, you see this assault around kind of the progress that we made. So I think this is a monumental moment in our history to do what's right, to change the narrative, to change our circumstances, but to own our narrative and own our circumstances. And so we really want to empower people to be the best versions of themselves. And I think you can do that. And Mike said volume, change is a volume-based game. And so we're really focused on building community. Via community, you can not only build networks and resource share and all those type of things, but there's volume in community. And when you're all together towards a common goal on a consistent basis, I think that's ultimately where change happens, and you begin to direct and own your own narrative, as opposed to allowing the majority to direct and own your narrative.
For sure. And that kind of leads right into like what you guys are doing with HQ House right now. What was the reason for kind of creating that space? Was it, as you said, John, because of kind of what we're seeing, like with the cutbacks, with kind of DEI initiatives, and kind of the climate we live in, having a space for like Black professionals to kind of help each other, to uplift each other, to empower to empower each other? What was that kind of the genesis of that? Can you guys kind of break down why having like a kind of a luxury kind of social member only Black club was like so important?
I think for us, it was definitely a journey in getting to opening HQ for sure. I mean, it wasn't our first organization that we started, and so that journey was critically important. But with just like the genesis of HQ, we've always been in like the community building space, right? And we always understood the importance of providing a safe space specifically for Black folks to come together and feel like they can be themselves, right? As a Black person, we're not all monoliths. Sometimes I want to listen to a cool panel. Other times I want to listen to ratchet music. Other times I want to be inspired by the people around me. So I think to create safety, because we live in worlds where we're oftentimes not able to come as our authentic selves. So we wanted to provide a space for people to come together, specifically Black folks who can be their authentic selves, who can network, who can share resources, who can build relationships. And so we just never thought of a space like that to the type that we envisioned existed. While there's other spaces who are incredible, doing really incredible things, we wanted to create something that was a little bit different. And so it was not only about the social experiences, it was about the personal and professional development. It was about the resource sharing. It was about the brand and personal development of kind of each other, but also of the community as a whole. And so we really wanted to create something different and something unique. And we think we've accomplished that, but not by just ourselves. It was obviously a team and then our amazing community members who add to it on a daily basis. And we also understood the importance of being that connector between African Americans in this country and then Africans on the continent. Mike and I have been doing work across Africa over the last 7 years and understood the importance of really having that connective tissue. And so we were very strategic around our next location of our membership club being in Africa, and then Kenya specifically, because Kenya is a strategic partner for the United States. It's actually the only African country that's a strategic partner of the United States, a named strategic partner. And it is an economic and business trade hub of East Africa. And so kind of all those considerations and the way the world's evolving, we're becoming more flat. Africa will make up 25% of the world's population in the next decade and a half. I mean, all those things coming together, it made sense to have our second location on the continent to ultimately continue the mission and kind of vision that we initially started with.
For sure. And Mike, I wanted to go to you talking about like what John saying, like kind of being different, and that second location very intentionally wanting it to be on the African continent. Do you, I can kind of maybe speak on from my vantage point, like, do you maybe feel like this is like a critical juncture for like global, like Black connectedness? Because you see the way like Afro beats has started to be embraced. You see Black more than ever, like it feels like Black Americans are, going to Africa, wanting to learn more about their roots. Like the African diaspora, it almost seems like it's coming together in a way that we haven't seen. And I think from my vantage point, like my family's from Ghana, and I really feel that, just because for the longest time, like growing up, there was always like this separation. It almost felt like two different worlds. But as I've gotten older, I feel like things are starting to come together. And so do you, Mike, almost feel like, do you share my feelings in that we're almost seeing emerging or kind of a connectedness of the global Black community in a way we haven't seen? And do you think maybe HQ can like play a role in continuing to nurture and cultivate the environment we live in?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think we're starting to see the organic and natural kind of connective tissue across the globe of people of African descent. And I think it's like an evolution. And I would actually argue that African Americans are at fault for it taking this long. And there's so many things that we can look into, like systemic racism and structures, and how we wanted to model ourselves off of people that don't look like us because that's what we've been fed for generations. And if you've been fed that for generations and you've been told that your skin is not pretty, your African roots are evil, right? You will actually start trying to separate yourself and distance yourself as much from that. And so I think, African Americans themselves sometimes went out of the way to ensure that no one associated them with Africa. And now I think as people become prouder in who they are and prouder in being Black, now they're more willing to. So I think the continent was always like wanted to welcome us and wanted to embrace African Americans specifically. And I just think that we, for all sorts of justifiable reasons that weren't in our control, like we're not as willing to embrace. And now I think because we have this pride and this new sense of Blackness, especially in North America, now it's making us more willing to really be embraced by our brothers and our sisters across the globe and appreciate our culture and appreciate our music and all of those, appreciate our food and wanting to move over to the continent, right? And it's part of the evolution. Now, the question becomes, how do we capitalize on that? Right. And so you mentioned, does HQ have a role in that? And John also mentioned like the systems and like diversity, equity, inclusion and things being dismantled. This, in our opinion, is a monumental moment in time for people of color globally, right? Because we've all been, whether you're in Africa, in Latin America, or North America, we are all operating under a structure that is not created by us, right? And sometimes we get this carrot dangled in front of us, like DE&I, to where we think that things are being positioned to help us. But the bottom line is they're still not framed and created by us. So whenever the creator determines they're no longer interested, we just end up having to be taken wherever that wave goes. And so now we have the opportunity in a global community that is connected of people of color that will be the majority of the world's population to actually start controlling and framing our own narrative versus allowing us still to be guided by other people's narrative. And so HQ in our houses, as well as our global communities, we want to be instrumental in helping create that connectivity, but also instrumental in dealing and changing the mindset of people of color, Black people, because connection is one thing, but if you're still being controlled mentally, connection doesn't matter. And so both of those are really, really important in order for us to really drive and take advantage of this moment in time.
Absolutely. And John, to kind of shift to you, and I guess the fact that you guys are doing this together is really powerful. And I think in a way you guys almost, you get to like share the burden of like kind of going after that mission of connectedness and helping, uplift and empower kind of like this global, like kind of Black community. I guess, how is having your brother go on this journey with you kind of helped? Because like taking this on for yourself, I mean, you could have a team and whatnot, and I know you guys do, but the fact that you guys kind of get to take this on together, what has maybe that meant to you?
No, it means a lot. I mean, it's amazing, right? So to go on a journey, obviously, with your best friend, your brother, someone that knows you your whole life. I'm the younger brother. You can tell by just my youthful spirit and youthful great looks. But yeah, no, it's special, right? And I think you can't really kind of say how big of a deal it is to really, because I think we're doing something so significant, and we really feel like the calling. And so to share these experiences, to go to the continent, to see the lives that we're impacting, to build community, to create experiences that we're shaping the culture and frameworks for individuals that look like us. It's a special thing. I think it's dope to do it by yourself, but it's like a level of dopeness and a level of like significance to do with your brother. I think it's just really, really impactful and very important. It's super special.
And I'll add to that too. So if you think about like sports teams, like you always hear that, football example, Tom Brady just throws the ball up and he knows exactly where the receiver is going to be because he's been playing with this receiver for like 20 years, right? So they already understand, and that sports analogy can be thrown out to every type of sport, right? And so when you have someone, there's one thing to work with someone for 10 years or 15 years. There's another thing to actually know someone their whole life and what makes them tick and what makes them concerned and where they find passion and drive. And then if I understand that and John understands me, we understand where we fit into this larger puzzle to make the organization and the teaming successful. And I just don't think you could ever engineer that in an environment that wasn't tied to you knowing each other for your whole entire life and sharing experiences your whole entire life.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. And To kind of go back to kind of Africa, this African expansion for a second. I don't know how many other countries in Africa that you guys have been to, apart from Kenya, but what have you maybe learned as you look to expand your business onto that continent? What have you maybe learned about the similarities between the Africans and the Black Americans that you didn't already know, or maybe a common point, a similar thread that you think can further that connection that we've talked about, like as we kind of start to coming together more? What have you maybe noticed from your guys' time being out there and starting a venture there?
John, I think we lost your audio.
Hit mute by accident. There was a fire engine going
You're
by.
good.
What I've noticed the most, and it's just so inspiring, is the level of like grace, determination, grit, integrity, and just work and diligence to be the best version of themselves. I was just so inspired across like every country that we've been to. There's a level of like humility, but a level of grace and level of determination that is so inspiring. Right. And so I think as marginalized communities and the Black folks in this country, I think we carry that same level of commitment, that same level of diligence. We understand that we have to be twice as good, work twice as hard to accomplish the same task as our majority colleagues. And so I think that level of shared experience is definitely something that struck me. But I think the level of humility and the level of grace, at least from the folks that we engage with on a daily basis, we're on the continent, is just so inspiring. I think as African Americans, we can learn a lot because a lot of these folks we engage with, in different spaces across the continent, they have so little, but really are thankful for so much. And I think as people who have so much to some degree compared, we should be more grateful. And I think there should be a level of humility that we operate with more. And I think I've been humbled, I've been more determined, but I've also been impacted by those experiences. So I think there's definitely some commonalities, but there's definitely some differences as well.
And I also think there's like a level, no matter if it's on the continent of Africa or any other place on the world or in the world that we exist as Black folks, there's a level of like innovation and creativity and just figuring it out that once again, I my gut told me it existed, but just watching the creativity that comes from the young people, especially on the continent of Africa, it's inspiring, but it's also no different than if I go to a school in inner city Detroit and I see a whole bunch of kids who don't really have anything, and what they're able to figure out is amazing. Right. And once again, we all understand another common thread, because we're able to talk to Black folks all around the globe. We understand, we share the fact that if we want to start businesses, no matter if you're Black in North America, Black in Africa, Black in Portugal, like you're not getting the kind of funding that people that don't look like you are. You share that experience. Mm-hmm. If you walk into a room as an African, if a Black African, and you're walking into a white African establishment, you're looked at a certain way, just like if I'm in Portugal and I'm Black, or if I'm in North America. So there's also a lot of shared experiences when it comes to overcoming perception that we all share. But the things that I like to double down on is our creativity, our innovation, our brilliance. It's unmatched. And it gives me hope that if we can capitalize and connect it, what we could do together would be amazing.
For sure. Like you almost can't even imagine like what this world would be like without like Black innovation, without entertainment, sports, whether it's like Blacks in South America or Africa, Afro-Europeans. I mean, this would be a very bland and unentertaining.
It would be very unseasoned. It would be
very unseasoned. That's the right way to put it, for sure. And I wanted to go back to kind of your guys' expansion to Africa for a second. And John, you had mentioned how, like, I guess by like 2050, Africa should account for like a fourth of the world's population or something like that. And, I'm starting to see more and more about why like Africa is, a tremendous like business opportunity, like for Black people, like African diasporans to come back. And I guess can you guys explain a little bit more about why there's opportunity there? Because I think like forever, right? Like Africa has had like resources, right? But it's, whether it's in Europe or in America, just how how the African continent has been just taken advantage of and used it to kind of enrich and kind of white people, these mega powers in the world today. But I feel like there's almost a shift in like how Black people are looking at like the opportunity in Africa. So I was wondering if either of you could explain like why it's such a big opportunity, like for people who look like us to kind of like go home, to the motherland, so to speak, and like start to build stuff.
Yeah, I think it's important for people that look like us to go home to the motherland and build stuff, because I think ultimately it's where we're all from, right? I think that's the kind of the genesis of where we were all created. I think foundationally that's where we're from. And I think it's important for us to connect with those roots. But I'm also a firm believer, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so level of education you can get from being back home, being on the continent, and the level of opportunity that you can see as a result of being educated and engaged is tremendous, right? So I think we've learned and grown so much just by our experiences going, right? And so I would always, and every time I get a chance, I'm like literally yelling from the mountaintop to tell people to go back to Africa and really experience it, right? Whether it be any country across the continent. I think every country is unique and different and has its own special vibes and kind of experiences and opportunities that they that present. But I think it's just allowing yourself to be vulnerable, allowing yourself to go back, experience it, and really understand the significance of it, putting your feet on the African soil and just kind of feeling what that feels like. It's just different. Right. And it's also just really dope to go somewhere and you only see Black folks. Right. So, I mean, it's just that too. Right. And so I think I just am a firm believer in really encouraging folks to do something that they've never done before, they've never gone, because I think it's going to present a lot of different opportunities that you might have not ever thought.
And you also mentioned too about like the historical extraction from Africa, especially like the Western world.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked earlier about like this is a pivotal moment in time for people of color. It's also a pivotal moment for Africa and people of color, because there's one thing to extract like natural resources, that sucks and all, but where the real danger becomes is extracting human capital. Right. And right now, part of why Africa is becoming popular is people are about to be starting to see, oh, these are like really smart people over here. And we can throw all sorts of historical data points that like the Western world will come into a place, they will over-educate you, right, as that newly kind of found area of the world. And then they will be able to underpay you to service what they need back in the Western world. And oh, by the way, they will then get you to buy the products that you have created through the education that they gave you, right? And so we also have to be very careful and not pat ourselves too hard on the back that, the world in Africa, because if we don't play this right and we don't kind of pour into it and we let the Western world, we can actually find ourselves in a worse place than what we were now. So just something we should always kind of consider, and why it's so important for Black people to pour into Africa, assuming that we have our best interest at hand.
How do we continue to push that message at the highest levels? What you're saying, Mike, because ultimately, like, this could end up being another way where Black people are kept in this paradigm that has only benefited Western society, right? Like how do we keep that message of what you're saying, like helping more and more Black people wherever in the world you're from, to like realize what's happening and really take advantage of this moment to make sure that this is just not another version of brainwashing or slavery or segregation or whatever it is? Like how do we make sure Black people hear what you guys are saying?
I was talking to a brilliant academic a couple weeks ago about this topic, and he tied it to the importance of HQ, because he says that what happens inside of the country club, like people never screw over the members of the country club. They'll walk over anybody else, but like you just don't want to ostracize or hurt anybody inside the country club because that hurts you fundamentally as a member. Like you can't do business, you can't do stuff like that. So we start seeing ourselves as Black people as a connective organization, right? As like we don't let anybody, we never screw each other over, and we use our collective to drive the change that we want. Then we don't have, and we're unapologetic to anybody else who's not inside of kind of like the little club of our people, right? Then we don't necessarily have to be worried about being bamboozled or having kind of these folks outside of our group come in and reposition, you know, how we actually deliver our talent and our value. And it's interesting because if you look at places like India, and you look at even China to a degree, but especially India, like Western cultures came into India, they poured a whole bunch of education. And then once they put a whole bunch of education, then they put a whole bunch of like call centers and manufacturing plants and stuff like that to where then they could extract the resources of the education. But you had an organization called Emphasis come in, right? And Emphasis started saying, okay, it was by Indians, and they started taking back over like everything and taking over the education that was poured in. And so now India itself, it still has Western influence, but it definitely has kind of gained and back being run by, and the business pushed by people who are native to that land. And so once again, we're at the infancy here in where Africa is. So we have an opportunity to not be put in a position to where we now have to figure out how we claw back what was naturally ours. But it's, to answer your question, it's about how do we have people come together? How do we collectively create this space to where we own it and don't necessarily let anybody infiltrate it, and we drive our own narrative and where we want to go?
I guess that kind of gets me thinking too, because it's so interesting because everyone is saying, you know, we have to, like, everyone has to kind of think global, right? Because it's a global world. But I almost feel like there's a segment of like Black people who think, you know, when we think global, it's like more of like assimilating ourselves more to kind of like different cultures, right? Like to you know, white and Asian, which is fine to a degree, but it's also like, I feel like a lot of people don't think that global can mean like that global Black connectedness that we're kind of discussing. And so I guess how do we, or maybe this is kind of a repeat of what I already asked, but like for you, John, like how do we maybe change the frame, the perspective of what being like a global, like Black citizen means, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And actually it's something we talk about a lot. And it's actually the genesis for like a concept that we're launching later this year. As part of the kind of the HQ framework, we're launching what we're calling the HQ Global Network, which is focused on bringing together 1 million Black professionals around the world by 2026 in this large, massive community around the globe. And we're launching later this year in 100 cities around the world. We'll launch satellite locations. We'll have ambassadors on the ground in 100 cities, because to your point, we believe in owning our own narrative. And the way you do that is by numbers. And the way you do that is building community where people can ultimately network, share resources, and build authentic relationships together. And so we believe in the power of this global Blackness. We believe in the power of this global network. And that's why that's such a critical focus of ours. Is like, how can we do something that's never been done before around creating this global community of people around the world? And so I think that will hopefully address some of the issues that we currently see around that connective tissue, because as the world is super flat now, people travel, people are more ready to move around the world. How can we build community in spaces that people have never been, but they integrate into a space very, very easily based upon an already established community for them?
Sure.
And globality, just to add to that, globality, a lot of times for Black people, we see it as assimilation. Like, how do we assimilate and fit into like the areas that we are? And globality is actually reach, right? Like how many tentacles and what is my reach across the world? So if you look at like a corporation, Nike is a global corporation. The Nike brand is the Nike brand, right? It's pretty consistent. They're not changing their brand and their identity and their mantra just because they're in China versus they're in, the United States versus they're in Africa, right? Nike is Nike is Nike. Now, how they position and market their brand is slightly different based off of the regions what their world they are, but they're not assimilating and changing who they are based off where in the world. They're just using places in the world to extend their reach of what they're trying to communicate and to push. And I think we as Black people, there's a lot we can learn by how corporations position themselves who are global versus how we believe we should position ourselves as global citizens.
Awesome. And where do you guys see, John, you mentioned that network that you guys are, working on, but I guess for both of you, like 5-10 years down the line, like what do you see HQ House becoming? Do you maybe even look at goals that way? I mean, I know your mission is right, like to kind of continue to nurture that kind of community, that communal feel, that global Black connectedness, as we've discussed. But like in terms of like tangible like goals, like 5-10 years down the line, do you guys have a clear vision of what you want HQ House to be, or is it more of, I don't know, a month to month deal in terms of how you guys are looking at where you guys are taking it?
You want to take that one?
Now, please start it off.
Well, yeah, it's not month to month,
Yeah.
but no, we definitely have goals. I mean, I think, again, kind of going back to my initial point, I think we want to create a community that's never been created before. I think we want to create something that really brings people together around the world. I think launching this global network later this year will be a starting point to really build the foundation for people to grow, to network, and to resource share and build community. And I think that will hopefully pay dividends to address some of the issues that we talked about, from the resources of Africa being extracted to the assimilation. I think some of those things can be combated based upon people being knowledgeable of what exists, engaged in what's possible, and part of a community that's really driving towards impact. And so when we think about 5-10 years from now, I mean, from a number standpoint, we want to have millions of people around the world engaged in this community. We want to be doing pop-up experiences for people around the world to go and experience different things they never experienced. We want to create a framework for business to be transacted and people to grow from the entrepreneurship standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a mental health and wellness standpoint. We want to be a community that's really built around like the 3 core principles that we founded this place on, which is around personal and professional development, and then experiences. And so if we stay true to those mandates and obviously stay true to the values that we care about as an organization and really focus on impact, I think there's just, the sky's the limit on where we can go.
Awesome. And then Mike, for you, like what's the biggest, with this massive vision that you guys have, like what's the biggest challenge in continuing to expand this message, expand this venture, and what is it taking to continue to push through that?
I think to continue to like push through, and like the biggest challenge, sometimes when you think big, and think outside the box, it's hard for people to kind of conceptualize it. Right? And you need, as we spoke about earlier, the other people on the team to be able to help you along the journey. And so as John and I continue to think big and think about change and all the things that John said, I think our challenge will always be, how do you take this big dream and fit it into a digestible, understandable box that many people live in? And so we have to always consider how to reinvent and customize a bespoke box for each person that we're talking through and talking with. And I think that will continue to always be the challenge. And then you have to do it in a way that allows you to push through the headwinds of the system, right? And so we're just seeing just the tip of the iceberg for this diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. And like, so I imagine, and I'm not a psychic, of course, but I imagine and I can see that this is going to get way worse and the system is going to push against us way harder in the near future. And we have to be prepared for that as well. And so that will also be a lift that we'll have to be carrying simultaneously as we're trying to build this community, because you're going to have people who are going to try to deprogram while you're programming.
Yeah.
And so who's going to win and who's going to be the fastest? So that is one of the big challenges.
So my follow-up to that is, how are you preparing for that inevitable pushback, which is only going to exponentially get larger and larger as we move into the future with that vision? And I guess that's for you, Mike, or John.
And it goes to the empowerment piece, right? So the quicker we can start making you feel like you're enough, right? The quicker we can start making you think that you can do this without anybody else's support, the quicker we can start to deprogram some of the things that have been programmed over generations tied to concepts like internalized oppression and racism. Like, that's what we're really focused on on top of the community build. Like, we're reinforcing every day that you deserve everything you have plus more, and let's figure out how you can get there. So if we can do that, then by the time some of these other things happen, then you already don't care about those other things because you don't need and you're not dependent on those other things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I guess for you, John, what has maybe given you guys the audacity to believe that you guys can change the world with this idea? Like, what, like, yeah, like, why do you believe that you two brothers are the ones that can take on a mission of this magnitude?
Yeah, and when I say we believe that we can change the world, I think it's like the collective effort of what we put out being built with like the communities that we're able to create, right? So I think we can share the vision, but the ultimate fuel for the ignition and for the engine to really go is going to be the community members like yourself and others that believe in this larger calling, this larger purpose, and this larger community. I think we've always been visionaries, and we've been great with assimilating a team that comes together to help kind of push that out. But what we've learned with HQ, specifically here in Washington, is the beauty of the membership and the beauty of the community that's formed and the relationships that are formed and fostered. And so we believe if we create a space, it's almost like the Field of Dreams analogy. If you build it, they will come, right? And I don't think anybody has built it the way that we envision building it. Mm-hmm. And we believe, especially based upon the conversations that we're having right now and some of the points that we've mentioned, we need this community more than ever. And so we believe that we have the relationships, we have the know-how, we have the audacity, the diligence, the kind of the commitment to build it. And we feel like if we build it, they will come. And so that's kind of the analogy I could compare it to. But I think it's just trying to create a space that we think is needed and that ultimately would benefit all of us.
That's awesome. Well, this has been terrific, guys. I guess kind of winding down here. Where can people go to learn more about each of you and the Burns Brothers agency, and then also HQ House specifically, and everything you guys have going on with that? Yeah.
Our website is theburnsbrothers.com. And so we'll have all of our businesses on there, and then specifically to HQ, it's just hq-house.com. And that has all of the houses in Kenya, and then our global membership as well.
Awesome. And last one for both of you. This is a big question, but I ask all my guests this at the end. What does Black success mean to you?
I love that question. I don't feel that we will ever be successful and equal if we are described by it requires a descriptor in front of us, right? So if I'm a Black doctor, or I run a podcast around Black, or it's same with like women or anybody else, right? Like, to me, that's Black success when you don't even have to say Black, right? And I just happen to be Black, right? And so once we have that, once we're there and you're just a great podcast host, not a Black podcast host who's great, then we're successful.
Yeah. And then kind of along those same lines, I think Black success looks like for me similarly, where we're not always defined first by that descriptor. And from a business standpoint, we're perceived to be the best, not Black business, but just the best business.
Yeah.
Because I was challenging ourselves the other day to think about like any major company that's a Black company that operates outside of just a Black consumer base. And I think you can think of like someone like a Robert Smith, but it's very limited, and maybe like a Sheila Johnson, or you think about like Black business owners and their customer base, it's generally Black. It's not like a mass market customer base. And so I think we need to kind of challenge ourselves from like a success standpoint. I think that's the barometer, because we're smarter, better, higher performing, but we're limited in opportunities that are outside of our, our stakeholder base, which are mainly people of color and Black folks specifically.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that perspective. And again, thank you guys so much for joining me, and everyone listening out there. Appreciate you guys for tuning in to this latest episode of Pinnacle Code. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe. I'm assuming many of you listening are checking this out via YouTube, but also on Spotify and soon to come on Apple Podcasts. And then in terms of social media, most active on Instagram and TikTok. But I guess until next time, I will see you guys soon. Thank you so much, Mike and John. Appreciate you.
Thank you.